Tulpas, strange entities that operate within your brain and seem to have their own sentient consciousness. Are they real? Are they fiction? And if they're real, how do you make one of your own? Let's talk a little bit about that. Hey guys, welcome back to Tipharot. It's me, Matt here, and today I want to talk a bit about tulpas. Now, these have become a bit more popular recently, and so you might have already heard the term, you might know what they are, but if you don't, essentially the quickest way to sum them up is they are a segment of your brain, some part of your brain that has kind of developed its own personality and seems to be able to act with its own separate consciousness to the one that you're aware of all of the time. Now, your brain does this all of the time. Your brain separates off tasks and can work independently of what you're actually consciously thinking. This is what the subconscious is all of the time. It's doing things of its own accord, but you're not aware of them consciously. So we already know it can do this. And tulpas are essentially a way of kind of using this for other purposes. You know, creating your own particular function within your brain that has its own consciousness, that seems to be sentient, its own personality. Essentially, it's like a more advanced version of having an imaginary friend, and this particular imaginary friend can be put to use for various things, or if that's your thing, it can just be there for companionship. Now, I want to preface this with saying that this perhaps isn't something for everyone. In certain circles, in spiritual circles, in circles involved in things like magic and that, the idea of creating entities within one's own mind has been around for forever, essentially. And the more common form of doing this would be to create an entity that simply does not have any sentient consciousness whatsoever. It's just there for a particular task. Say, you need to find opportunities for work. You could make this entity particularly, just search for opportunities for work and point them out to you whenever they arise, and that could help you find your job. But it wouldn't have any consciousness of its own. It wouldn't develop personality, feelings, and it wouldn't change its mind or disobey your instructions. So with a tulpa, it now has its own personality, and for someone that is perhaps looking for some kind of companionship with this entity, that makes sense. That's an advantage rather than a disadvantage. But if you're actually looking for results, you're actually wanting it for a practical purpose, then you have to consider whether it's really worth creating something that's kind of almost like a living entity within your own mind, because you're essentially giving away control of a portion of your mind to this entity. One thing I will say at this point though is that you don't need to actually be scared about it. There's a lot of horror stories about someone creating a tulpa and it taking control of them or something like this, and the reality of it is that you are still going to be in control of your brain, and you can get rid of the tulpa if you want to. It's just that you should kind of proceed with caution. Don't do it if, just for fun, just for giggles. Do it if it's actually something that you have a real reason for doing. So now to get on to the creation process. Now, there's lots of different ways of creating a tulpa, or creating a thought form in general. And these range from things like essentially drawing it out, drawing out how it's going to look, giving it a name and that, giving it a personality, and then kind of taking on the role of it, basically pretending that you're this entity and, speaking for it, acting for it, doing that, until it kind of, that portion of your brain kind of starts to, form a network and starts to actually exist as a kind of system within your brain. And at that point, it can start to take on some life of its own with a lot of repetition. So that's one simple way of doing it. But the whole reason that I actually made this video in the first place is the fact that I feel that I have a much simpler way of doing this than the common methods that are out there. So the reason that I made this video was because I was thinking about tulpas, and I was thinking about the fact that I've essentially done this whole process before I even knew what a tulpa was. And the reason that I've done that is because I've always enjoyed telling stories. I've always enjoyed things like role-playing games. I've always enjoyed, creating characters, creating fantasy worlds, and, thinking up a backstory for these characters and where they come from, what their story is, what they're planning to do, what their personality is like. And I realised that as I did this, when I created these characters, when I would actually put a lot of thought into them and continue, repeatedly working with them and developing their stories, it was like these characters took on a life of their own. And suddenly I could know what this character would think in a certain situation. I could know what they would respond to me if I said a certain thing. And suddenly it was like I had a sentient, conscious personality that I had created of my own accord. Essentially, the same thing as a tulpa. And writers have known about this for a long time. If you actually ask someone who's written, a bunch of fantasy novels, they'll say that after so long of writing on this, the characters actually do take on a life of their own in their mind, as if they were real characters. So you can use this to your advantage. And think of it like you're creating a character for a role-playing game. If you've ever played something like Dungeons and Dragons and you've created a character, you'll know that it's kind of helpful to come up with a backstory for this character, to flesh them out, to make them more interesting, like a real person. So if you want to create a tulpa of any kind, whether it's a person, whether it's an animal, whether it's just some weird glowing orb or whatever, whether it has a shape at all, the key is you want to give it a name, give it a background, and really shape it to be what you want it to be. And really add more detail, because the more detail that you add, the more it will kind of solidify it in your brain as a real thing that exists within your brain, that has its own personality. And then you have to use lots of repetition. So once you've come up with a backstory for your particular tulpa, you have to re-engage it. And you can do this in lots of ways. So if you do something like Dungeons and Dragons or whatever, you can use it as a character. You can play them and, engage their story, progress it along. If you don't do anything like that, you can, write a story about them. You can write what they're doing. You can write what they would do from day to day, the things that they like. You can essentially draw them and draw a kind of little journey that they're going through. You can do all sorts of this. And the thing about this is, whatever you kind of engage with a lot in your mind, it's going to take up a bigger portion of your mind. The more you engage with something, the more you're focused on it. And the more you're focused on it, the kind of more chance it has to blossom inside your mind. So by actually creating this and giving it lots of depth and then expanding it out, like by repeating it over and over and visiting it over and over, it's going to take on a life of its own. And at that point, you are going to have a tulpa. So thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Write down in the comments below if it's worked for you, if you've created your own tulpas, what your experiences have been, if they've been good or bad. And, remember, proceed with caution, try it out for yourself if you want to, but, don't just do it for fun. Come up with a real reason for doing it. Use it creatively in some way. And hope you've enjoyed. If you did, remember to subscribe up there because we've got regular videos that come out every Wednesday and Saturday. If you like the video, leave a thumbs up. If you have any comments or questions or want to talk about your own tulpas, do so in the comments below. If you want to keep watching, check out the video linked on screen. And if you haven't already, remember to check out my 14-part audio course for lucid dreaming. It's called Advanced Lucidity, and it takes you all the way from the basics of having your first lucid dream to advanced stuff like creating dream rooms and overcoming fears with your dreams. So check that out. There'll be a link to it up there, and you can find out more about it on Gumroad. Also, if you haven't checked it out already, remember to check out my ebook, 4 Steps to Manifesting Anything. It's essentially a 4-step guide to the process that I use when I want to manifest different circumstances in my life. I've been using it for almost a year now, and it's brought me a lot of good. And if you want to find out more about it, there's a whole lot of info on the Gumroad page, which you can find up there again. Thanks for watching, guys. Take care.